If you care about the real mechanics of survival history, not the romanticized version, then you're in the right place. Before we go any further, make sure you subscribe to the Legacy of Survival channel and share this video with someone who takes World War II history seriously. This channel exists to preserve the practical knowledge that kept people alive when doctrine failed, equipment broke, and weather turned lethal. What most modern viewers miss is that World War II was fought in conditions that routinely defeated issued gear. Matches disintegrated in humidity, lighters froze solid, and fuel was rationed to the drop. Yet soldiers, resistance fighters and displaced civilians still managed to produce fire in rain-soaked forests and snowbound wastelands. These weren't tricks. They were field-proven systems built on physics, chemistry and discipline. Let's get straight into them. Why wartime fire starting became a science rather than a convenience. By 1941, armies had learned the hard way that fire was not optional. Fire meant sterilized water, thawed hands, cooked calories and morale. Units operating in Eastern Europe, the Alps, Scandinavia and the Pacific all faced environments where traditional fire-making failed. This forced innovation at the lowest level, often passed orally and rarely documented in manuals. The Ferrocerium rod mastered beyond sparks. Ferro rods existed before the war, but World War II users refined how they were deployed. Soldiers learned to shave the rod aggressively, producing hot metal curls rather than relying on sparks alone. These shavings would ignite even when damp, especially when paired with wax cloth or fat-soaked fibres. In winter, rods were kept against the body to prevent brittleness. A modern application is simple scrape material first, then strike, rather than wasting energy chasing sparks. Right, so chemical ignition using potassium permanganate. Resistance groups and medics actually carried potassium permanganate for wound cleaning, but, it doubled as a fire starter when mixed with glycerin or sugar. This reaction worked even in heavy rain, since it generated its own heat, independent of oxygen flow. The practical wartime method involved shielding the mixture in a folded bit of paper or a tin lid until ignition actually occurred. Today, understanding this method really reinforces how medical supplies were deliberately chosen for dual use. Now, let's talk about the candle-in-a-can trench method. Infantrymen learned pretty quickly that flame height mattered less than heat retention. A short candle, placed inside a small metal container with a couple of side ventilation holes, produced a protected flame that burned in wind, sleet and snow. This system could even ignite damp wood shavings placed above it. Modern survivalists, often without realizing it, replicate this with hobo stoves, but its origins lie in trench improvisation. Magnesium scavenged from aircraft wreckage. Now that was a game-changer. Downed aircraft became resource caches. Magnesium components, shaved into powder, burned intensely, even on ice. Pilots were actually trained to prioritize magnesium recovery, since it would ignite wet, fuel-soaked debris instantly. The key, though, was restraint. Only small amounts prevented flare-ups that could expose positions. This knowledge, by the way, directly informs modern emergency aviation kits. Grease-soaked cloth was often carried as a sort of ration insurance. Animal fat, Boot grease or even weapon lubricant soaked into cloth would produce a slow-burning, water-resistant tinder. This was, a pretty common practice among Soviet troops of the Red Army, especially those operating in snowbound regions where dry material was just non-existent. The cloth wasn't dried, but rather wrung out and then ignited with a spark source. The lesson here, really, is quite clear. Fire resilience came from preparation, not luck. Smokeless ember transfer using charred fungus was another clever trick. Birch polypore and similar fungi were deliberately charred and carried as ember banks. These could be revived hours later, even after snowfall, which is honestly impressive. Resistance fighters favoured this method because it produced minimal smoke. And, the same method works today by storing charred material in a breathable container, allowing fire to be moved rather than restarted. Right, so ammunition powder as controlled ignition. Small amounts of gunpowder from dismantled cartridges were used to jump-start stubborn fires. Now, experienced soldiers never dumped powder. They created a thin ignition trail beneath tinder. German infantry of the Wehrmacht actually documented this in field notes, even though it was officially discouraged. Modern practitioners, they should understand the principle without replicating unsafe quantities. Let's talk about body heat-assisted friction fire in extreme cold. Friction fire wasn't abandoned in World War II. It was adapted. Materials were pre-warmed inside clothing before use. Hands rotated shifts to maintain temperature, and attempts were short and deliberate. This method was rare, but absolutely critical for escape and evasion scenarios taught to operatives of the Special Operations Executive. The takeaway really is that friction fire in cold climates is about thermal management, not endurance. Now, why does this knowledge still matter? These methods weren't folklore. They were refined under pressure, validated by survival, and honestly forgotten because post-war convenience replaced necessity. Applying them today isn't about nostalgia. It's about understanding how humans adapt when systems fail. Practice one method at a time. Learn how materials behave wet. Test ignition sources with gloves on. That's how wartime knowledge was built. If this guide added something new to your understanding of World War II survival realities, subscribe to Legacy of Survival and share this video with another serious historian or survivalist. These techniques deserve preservation, not rediscovery after failure.